Before we get into today's episode, shout out to my sponsor, Patriot Mobile, America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. I really appreciate them supporting the show, so if you want to support the people supporting this content, definitely go and switch using my code American Honey for a free month of service. Hey y'all, welcome back to the American Honey podcast. Today, I am joined by Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evette, who is also running for governor of South Carolina. Today, we are going to talk about leadership, the future of the state, young voters, and what it takes to run for governor. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you it was so nice meeting you at the prayer breakfast. I'm so glad we got to connect and you could get here. I mean, I am just so impressed. When young people get involved in this process, you can really turn out the votes and you can get young people passionate. I can try. But I think it takes one young person to talk to another young person to really go like, wow, maybe this is something I need to look into. So thank you for all of your efforts.
Of course, thank you so much. So let's go ahead and get into it. What made you want to run for governor?
Well, I wanted to run for governor because there's still so many great things we can be doing here in our state. I'm a business person at heart, so I've spent the majority of my career, and I see the business principles that we can now bring into government. The state has grown so much, fastest growing state in the country. There's so many business principles that I can bring into government. Automation, running efficiently, making sure we don't have waste, fraud, and abuse, and getting everybody to work together. Those are key principles for a government that's working efficiently and working for its constituents. And so I was just so encouraged by everything the governor and I did together that I said, this legacy needs to continue on and I need to take it now to the next level. And so I'm excited about running.
That's awesome. And so you are already facing some hardships. One of the topics I talk about very often is uneducated voters and getting teens educated before they get to the ballot box. So you were supposed to be the commencement speaker at South Carolina State University, but due to protesters, your invitation was revoked. And I am sure those protesters were unaware that Trump, who has many of the policies that you also hold, has done more for historically black universities than any other president ever has. So would you speak to that?
Absolutely. So I was asked to be their commencement speaker in December. And really didn't think much about it. Said yes. I've done commencement speeches for the last 8 years all across our state. And I love to talk about, I carry a message of hope. My grandparents were immigrants. My brothers and I were our first generation in our family to go to college. My dad was a tool and die maker. He went to a trade school. And so I talk about that. You will be your own worst roadblock in life, and you don't let that be. Don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to take chances. This is the best country to live in. We're so blessed. And that's the message I gave. But somehow the students found out that I was going to be their commencement speaker, which still is shocking to me. I'm not quite sure what riled them up about that. I'm sure there's a story there if somebody looks into it. But we got word that they did not want me to be there because I was pro-Trump and pro-life and anti-DEI and pro-law enforcement. And in their words, these were all their words, I didn't encapsulate their ideas of what they wanted for a commencement speaker. And you're right. And I said this on news show after news show, is that where was the faculty? Where was the leadership there to sit them down and say, listen, President Trump has done more for historically black colleges and universities than any other president in our history. And this General Assembly, which is Republican-led, continues to make sure that our historically black colleges and universities get the funding they need. The governor and I have been very supportive. Why would you be protesting us when we have really tried to make sure that resources were there, right, to uplift? We have always been very supportive. And that's what goes back to something that I've been saying now for over a year since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, is that, first off, Charlie was spot on. When conversation stops on college campuses or anywhere, that's when violence begins. And What I said was that any institution across South Carolina that receives taxpayer money has to allow speech. You have to allow conservative speech. You can allow, liberal speech, but it has to be balanced. And I said, when I am governor, if I see conservatives getting run off of campuses, if I see any of that happening, then we should take away their state funding. Because, I hear time and time again, I have 3 children, I've heard it from them, I've heard it from their friends, I've heard it from nieces and nephews. If you are conservative minded and you're a college student, and you have a professor that does not adopt your same core principles, you have to write your papers in a way that you don't really believe. It's in a tone or a tense that you don't necessarily think is true. You just don't want to, get the backlash of that professor. And that is wrong, because that means our professors are not teaching young people how to critically think. They're indoctrinating them. And thank you for bringing that to light, because I think if there's one thing I know from my own children, they don't like to be bamboozled, right? So if they think people are like planting seeds into them, they get more hungry to dig for their own information. And every time I talk to young adults and to high schoolers or even middle schoolers that come to the Capitol, I encourage them all the time. Look at the headlines of what the article is. That's really not the story. That's the gotcha to read into the story. So if you're not really reading the story, you're probably not getting all the information.
Exactly. And I would say there's that indoctrination, of course, happening in colleges, but also in public schools where teens are going, even elementary school kids are going. And I think there's just a lot of indoctrination across the board.
I agree.
That needs to be solved. So yesterday, the Senate stalled the vote to redraw the district lines. Will you explain to my audience the detrimental effect that could have?
Absolutely. So the Supreme Court put down a new ruling, and they basically said that you cannot draw districts gerrymandered by race. And so the governor and I both supportive of the General Assembly looking at all the districts to make sure that they were drawn correctly. And what the Senate basically said yesterday is, no, we're not going to do that. We think everything is okay here. Well, I think we should always try to be better. If we think we're perfect, what's the harm in looking at the maps and voting on them and making sure that these things are right? And, this is not just a South Carolina issue. This becomes a broader issue across our country.
Yeah, and Virginia just passed that as well. So
exactly. And in Virginia, I mean, they did not file their state constitution. Their own state Supreme Court overturned it. But look at the New England area, right? Democrats have been gerrymandering to knock out conservative voices for years. There are no Republicans representing their people in Congress. And so President Trump has done what he always does. He calls out injustice. And you can see when he hits the target, because Democrats go crazy, right? Yeah. They start screaming and yelling and name calling, because that's their tactic, is they try to silence conservatives by, first of all, saying words mean things that they really don't, so that they confuse people into being afraid to speak. And I think what we need to do, and what you saw happen in the Senate yesterday, was senators that didn't take a hardline stand for what the people of South Carolina want, right? I obviously am a big supporter of the president. I think we should do everything we can to give him a Congress that represents the will of the people. I mean, did you ever look, I always find it just shocking. You'll look at a map of the United States, and it is virtually all red, except for these little blue pockets here and there. But yet they control almost half of Congress. How does that represent the voting bloc of the country? And that's what it really comes down to, is we want a fair voting map. You're supposed to represent the will of your people. And when I travel the state, because the entire state are my constituents, they feel like this is a 7-0 state, that all 7 of our seats should be, Republican and represented in DC. So, okay, let's draw a map that seems fair, that is clustered together, that represents the will. There are people in certain districts, one district, that are Republicans that anytime I'm in that area will say, well, I don't vote because it doesn't matter. My vote will never count towards a Republican win. So they don't vote. And then you have other districts that are a plus, whatever, 10 plus, and they're going, well, I don't vote because it doesn't really matter. We're going to win. I think if you drew fairer districts across the state, Republicans would be energized to get out and vote. And if they believed the maps were fair, I think this goes to a much deeper problem, is that we have to let people know that we are protecting election integrity, that we have fair maps, and then we have to tell them, we've done all this. We've leveled this playing field. Now you have to do your part and get out and vote. And this is where what you're doing is so important. Young people do not get out and vote. You talk about we're coming to our 250th anniversary of this amazing country we get to live in. People died to give all of us the right to vote. People in countries across the world are still dying to get the right to vote and to control their own government. And we take it for granted. And we can't take it for granted because what happens here in this state house affects you probably more than it affects me or my mother or people that are now coming to the end of their work cycle, right? We have already kind of pushed through, but everything we do here affects what happens in our K through 12 system, which someday you will have children in. It affects what happens in our college system. It affects, funding to our technical colleges. It affects the industries that we're going to bring into our state. It affects the environment we're protecting, right? The beaches and things like that. Everything we do has such a bigger impact on your life and the lives of other young South Carolinians, but they just don't seem to realize that they have a voice. But you have to be educated, like we initially started this. You have to understand the issues. Socialism, that's all we're hearing young people talk about. Socialism has been tried everywhere, and it fails everywhere because somebody at the end of the day has to pay a bill. And my dad used to tell us that all the time. Never believe somebody when they tell you they're giving you something for free.
Yep.
Because nothing is free in this world.
There's, I'm guessing you didn't come up with it, but one of my teachers, when we were talking about socialism and capitalism, he came up with this acronym, and I can't remember how you would say it, but it was, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yep.
And so that was how we remembered on our test what socialism was.
But that's true. And, we see it happening. The governor, Kathy Hochul in New York, telling, everybody with any kind of means, successful business owners, right? I consider myself one of those people. I started my company with $5,000, I think, back in the day, and worked so hard to get it to where it is. But nobody ever gave it to me, right? Yeah. So if people saw my company, 20 years in, it was big and flourishing. That wasn't how it started out 20 years earlier. It was me and an office in my house, leveraging everything I had. So why would anybody out there think, if I worked that hard and I grew it that big, why wouldn't I be entitled to the rewards of that? I mean, the reward of working hard is having something at the end. And when we start to try to tell young people that, being successful isn't good, and working hard shouldn't give you the riches that you want, why would you work hard?
Yes.
Why wouldn't you just sit back on your heels and just let everything... Yes. But there is so much inner pride and satisfaction in working hard and accomplishing. And that's what we need to be talking about to young people, that I believe, and this is just as a parent, I'm an accountant by trade, right? So I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a sociologist, but I do believe that so much of the depression that we hear about in our young people comes from the fact that they're not out there living their lives. They're living it on a computer, they're living it on their phone. Get out and work, meet people, realize what it's like to work hard, realize how wonderful it is to earn a paycheck.
Yes.
And to know like, wow, I heard this great speaker, I think his name was Jimmy Allen, he's a country singer, I believe that's his name.
Okay.
But he was presenting at an event I was at. You talk about a gentleman who had a really hard life. Mm-hmm. And he talked about how his mother was in and out of jail. He lived with his grandfather for a while. His mother kicked him out when he was very young. But from the time he was little, when he was living with his grandfather, they lived in a trailer by a golf course. And he would wake up every morning and he'd go out on the golf course and pick up all the stray golf balls. He would package them in a bag and sell them to golfers as they were going in the morning. And he would use that money to send to his mother in prison.
Aww.
But what it taught him was that as long as he could work, he would never be hungry.
Yeah.
As long as he could work, he could always take care of himself. Yeah. And that's what drove him through life. That just came from the principles of hard work, right? Yes. It gives you a sense of the world not being so scary. Yes. When you know that you personally can take care of yourself.
Yes.
And so I think that there's so much of that has been lost by this idea of let government take care of you.
Yes.
Government should take care of very limited things. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, like, we should take care of delivering your mail. We don't do that very well. Everybody complains about it. So we really need to stick to our core principles. Yes. And we need to just empower people to be the best version of themselves that they want to be.
Yes. So you've mentioned your business background. Did you ever imagine that you'd end up in politics?
No, I didn't. I got involved in politics. I owned a payroll HR company. And we had clients that had 5 employees. We had clients that had 60,000 employees almost. And so everybody in between were complaining about the same things, and it was all government. Yes. Over-regulation, ever-changing Department of Labor laws, like all these very complex things that were stopping them from growing, stopping their profitability. And so I just started to think like, well, maybe I should run for something, right? Yes. And then I got to know the governor. I'm the first lieutenant governor elected with a governor, and he wanted a business person.
Oh, yeah? Somebody
that had signed the front of paychecks, who had put everything they owned on the line to start a business, who understood what businesses were going through. And he asked me to run with him as his running mate, and that's how I got here. But it really was the principles of my mom and dad that made me want to do that. Because my dad used to tell us from a very young age, don't come to me with a problem, come to me with a solution.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so I was like, okay, here I am complaining.
Yes.
But I have all this knowledge from the business world. Why wouldn't I try to make it better?
Yes.
And so it encouraged me when the governor came to me, and I've loved it. And I can see how being the next governor, I can take those core, you can't run government just like a business, but you can take the core principles that make businesses successful and adapt them here into government.
So you are the lieutenant governor now, and you're running for governor. So what makes you the best candidate?
Because, so I tell people this all the time, because I get that question, why you and why not the other 5 people that are running? And I said, for one, I've been a successful CEO in the private sector, and I've sat at the right hand of the governor now for 8 years. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's just moving my box down the hall, and we don't skip a beat, and the state is going in an amazing direction. So the governor, when he endorsed me, he gave me his endorsement. He said, if you like this chapter in South Carolina's history, you're going to love the next chapter with Pamela Evette as your governor. And I tell people, I think the one thing people don't do when they vote is they don't look at the resumes of the people they're voting for. And sometimes I think when I hear people talk, they get so frustrated with government because they're like, we elect these people and they can never solve these problems. But if you look at their resume, they really never had the resume to solve those problems in the first place. Yes. So what I tell people is look at the resumes of all of us. And if you wouldn't hire one of us to be the CEO of your company, then you shouldn't elect him to be the CEO of your state. I have sat in the executive branch. I have been a successful CEO. And that's my reasoning to tell you why all those young people out there that have the opportunity to vote this year, I'm going to run this state like I would want it to be run for my children, to give them the best opportunities for my children, for my grandchildren, for all the amazing things that are happening in this world, bringing those new career options to South Carolina and making sure that our best days are still yet ahead of us.
So what is one thing that you will immediately change if elected governor?
Automation in government. There's so many things. I think I look at everything through a business lens. And so there's never one thing you can do at a time. If on day one, I want to eliminate state income tax because we need to do that to continue to be competitive. When you do that, you have to make sure you continue growing. How do you grow? You have to make sure you have the energy you need to pull in the industries of the future. You have to make sure our college system, our secondary education system, and our K through 12 system is ready for those new careers. And we need to automate government because we are running on some antiquated systems. We can never be efficient if we're going to do that. And to make all those things work together, you have to do them kind of all simultaneously. And I'm used to that because when you're a CEO, I say that I use this analogy. You have 7 plates spinning all the time in the air, and they're all tethered together. So if one falls, they all fall. So you have to make sure they're all moving in the right direction.
That's amazing. So a lot of teens want to go into the political field, but they feel ignored because they're teenagers, and a lot of politicians think, oh, the teens aren't the voting population, so we don't need to talk to them. We don't need to handle that or worry ourselves with that. So a lot of teens want to get involved, but they feel ignored. So what advice would you give to a teen who wants to get involved and feels ignored by the politicians?
Well, I say go on to PamelaEvette.com and sign up to be a volunteer because there's so much you can do. And I will tell you, Wiley Shaw, he's running my ground game. I first met him when I first ran with the governor in 2017, 2018 was maybe the first time I met him. He was in high school at Burns High School. He started their Young Republican Club. He was working on campaigns, getting to know everybody. And now, he's at the other side of college. He is instrumental in my campaign. Get involved, start to know what's going on. You'll meet people and you will grow in the ranks, but you got to start somewhere. And normally that's putting out signs and handing out stickers and showing up for parades and door knocking and putting things on doors. But that's where it all begins. It all starts as a grassroots, and I would love them. If they're being ignored, you tell them to come and work on Pamela Evette's campaign. Okay, and there is one thing that I really want to do to get teens involved and to get politicians to listen to the teens' voices, which would be to have, I've told you about this before, but to have these assemblies in schools where politicians come to the schools and teens get their voices heard, and also teens get educated by the politicians who are running so that they know what is going on in their elections because they live in the state too, and these elections are determining the future of the state. I agree. I have spoken at high schools over the last 8 years. It's interesting. You have to be invited. So if I get invited, I try to work a day, my scheduling team tries to work like, oh, I'm going to be in this area. And, I'm going to be here doing this. I'd love to stop in. And a lot of times it's with classes. Like they'll say, well, can you be here for a few hours? And then I'll kind of go from class to class, usually junior, senior classes if it's a high school, and talk about government. And I really like interaction, not just me talking, but young people asking me, and their questions are really solid. Yes. Sometimes I think I get tougher questions from high schoolers and college kids than I do from adults. Because they truly are curious and they're not guarded of well, maybe I shouldn't ask her this because she's a lieutenant governor. I'm really open to all questions. So I've loved speaking on college campuses. I love speaking in high schools. And really, it's just schools have to invite us to come in to talk. That's incredible. Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for joining me. And thank you for watching the American Honey Podcast. I'll see you next Sunday.